Welcome back from lunch, everyone. My name is Shayna. I'm a member of the Atlassian team, and I am thrilled to be able to introduce Steve for today's talk, why we're bad at estimation and what we can do about it. It's an eternal question, but hopefully we'll get some answers after this talk. Fun fact about Steve that you might not otherwise know, Steve recently relocated his family from Sydney to Europe to a tiny chalet town of Kitzbühel. I'm butchering it. But anyway, you can ask him all about what it's like to move to Austria, and he's been blogging about it for us on Confluence. So pretty cool personal story there. But for now, I'll let you kick it off. Tell us a little bit about estimation.
Cool. All right. How's it going, everyone? Good? All right, before we get started, I just want to do a little exercise. It's not for your benefit. It's for mine. I'm very nervous. I need to calm down. Can I get you all to stand up? Thank you very much. Now, my team in Atlassian, the development team that I work in, we have a ritual. We run our ritual every day after we do our stand-up. And the ritual is that we take our stand-up token, we throw it high up into the air, and when it reaches the top of its parabolic curve, we clap. All together, all at the same time. It's awesome, and it always sets me up for the day. And I'd like to do that with you today. I'm not going to throw something because I'm going to break one of these monitors. What I'm going to do is I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and we're all going to clap together. Okay, you got it? All right? 1, 2, 3. Nice. All right, thank you. Sit down, sit down. Thank you very much. I feel good now. I feel good. Can anyone tell me what this is? Sydney Opera House. It's one of the most iconic buildings in Australia, if not the world. It's the jewel of Sydney's harbour foreshore. The Opera House was designed by John Ertzen in 1957, and it was actually submitted as part of a competition to create a national opera house at Bennelong Point. Back in 1957, they thought that the project was going to be completed within about 6 years, and they reckoned that it would probably cost $7.2 million. Construction for the Opera House finally started in 1959, but with any big project, there were some setbacks, there were some delays, and there were some challenges. For a start, development of the Opera House actually started before costs and designs were even properly finalized. Then they discovered that the engineering required for the sails was significantly more complicated than they first anticipated, and that required a lot of backwards and forwards between the architecture and the engineering teams. The New South Wales government insisted on making a number of progressive revisions to the design, which, if you've ever worked in advertising and with customers, is something that happens quite a lot. And then there were the changes to personnel. Robert Askin replaced Joseph Carhill as the New South Wales Premier, and then most notably, Ertzen himself resigned from the project, leaving a number of significant, undocumented challenges for his replacement, Peter Hall. Now, the Opera House was finally opened, but it was a significantly smaller endeavor. It was also a decade late and at a cost of $102 million. That's a 1,400% overrun. In the UK, the National Programme for IT in the NHS, the National Health Service, in 2002 was considered the world's largest civil IT programme. It intended to bring the NHS's use of information technology into the 21st century. It was going to introduce integrated electronic payment record systems, online choose and book services, computerized referral and prescription systems. And it was going to do all of this at a cost of £6 billion. Now, when the project was finally scrapped in 2011, it had cost the British taxpayer £12 billion, and they'd seen very little, if any, of those key benefits. But it's not just large-scale construction and IT projects that suffer from this program. I'm sure a lot of you here today have suffered at the hands of poor estimation. Whether that's as project leads, constantly having to adjust your timelines and your roadmaps and answer awkward questions, or as individual contributors thinking that you've nailed your estimation only to find out that it's going to take you significantly longer than you expected. And that's what this talk is all about. Why we're bad at estimation, and what we can do about it. But first, I got a little bit of a confession to make. You see, I'm not the only person involved in this talk. There is another, a collaborator, a conspirator, and her name is Jenny. This is Jenny. Jenny hates this photograph, by the way, and I'm really happy that I've got it up in 6-foot screens. Jenny can't be with us here today, and I want to there's a little bit of interaction in this talk, I do apologize, but I want you all to say hello to Jenny, because she will love the fact that 200 plus people are waving and saying hello all the way from Barcelona while she's safely in Sydney, not standing up here with me. So I want to take a little video. All I want you to do, on the count of 3, I like counting to 3, is just give me a big wave and say, hello, Jenny. You all right? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Hello, Jenny. That is awesome. Thank you very much. Now, the story of this talk starts about 6 months ago. At that time, both myself and Jenny were looking at project delivery, why it's late, and what we can do about it, but from slightly different areas. Jenny was really infused by a podcast, the Freakonomics podcast. And she was really interested in project delivery and big projects and projects that run over and how that can be dealt with and addressed. And for me, being the selfish individual I am, I was looking at individual contributors, developer effectiveness, and how, as individuals, we can look at the work that we're doing, make it more effective, and make our estimates more accurate. And we thought it'd be a good idea to put a talk together, and that's why we're here, or at least that's why I'm here. And at the core of poor estimation is something called the planning fallacy. The planning fallacy was proposed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in 1979, something which Kahneman actually won the Nobel Prize in Economics for later on. It's a phenomenon in which our predictions about how much time we need to complete a task display a positive bias and cause us to underestimate the time we need to complete that task. This has been studied. In 1994, psychologist Roger Buehler set out to measure the extent of the planning fallacy. And he took a group of honors students who had been working on their thesis and asked them to predict how long it would be until they submitted. On average, the students predicted it would take them about 34 days to complete the task. When the numbers came in, it turned out that on average, those same students took about 56 days, an overrun of 64%. Now, Buehler found that this didn't just apply to honors students. He also researched stockbrokers, electrical engineers, and even everyday mundane activities like queuing for petrol. And it happens across the board. And you might think that that would only happen on the first time that you were to estimate that task. But that doesn't seem to be the case. I had a friend called Bob. And I like to meet up with Bob relatively regularly. And when we meet up, we go for coffee. And every time, without fail, Bob's about 10 minutes late. And every time we arrange to go out for coffee the next time, I say, Bob, are you going to be on time this time? And Bob, without fail, every time says, yes, Steve, I will be on time. I will be there this time. Now, I know that Bob is going to be late. And Bob genuinely believes that he's going to be on time. And that's kind of the core of the planning fallacy. Now, in our discussions, me and Jenny realized that we wouldn't be able to solve everybody's problems when it came to estimation. It's a huge task, and there are so many variables. But there are 3 things that we think that you can do to make your estimates better and more accurate. There is optimism bias. The idea that bad stuff probably isn't going to happen to us. Strategic misrepresentation, telling others what they want to hear for our own personal gain. And coordination neglect. Only focusing on the work that needs to be done and not focusing on the cost of integrating it. If we can address these 3, then maybe, just maybe, we can be better at estimating and live simpler and easier lives. I want to start by talking about optimism bias. Optimism bias is a cognitive bias that causes us to believe that we're at lesser risk of experiencing negative events compared to others. It's also an unconscious bias. And an unconscious bias happens when we allow our attitudes, feelings, stereotypes, or beliefs to impact our judgment or understanding without conscious awareness. And that makes it kind of tricky to address. Now, the idea that we're subject to an optimism bias has been around for ages, but in my opinion, it was really popularized by Tali Sharot in her book, The Optimism Bias, A Tour of the Irrationally Positive Brain. Now, if you're not particularly into reading, Tali also does a fantastic TED Talk on this, and you should definitely check it out. In that talk, Tali runs an experiment. And it's an experiment that I would like to replicate with all of you here today, because audience participation is what these talks are all about. So if I can just get you to raise your hands. You don't have to stand up this time. Everyone raise your hands. Everyone. One hand is fine. 2 hands is okay. 1 hand is fine. Now, if you think, this could go horribly wrong, if you think that you are in the 20% of the least intelligent people in this room, put your hand down. Yes. If you believe you're in the 20% of the most intelligent people in this room, put your hands down. Oh. And so everyone else in this room, you're happily in that middle ground. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, hopefully what you saw from that is that there are way more people who think they are super smart than there are people who think they're not particularly intelligent at all. That's the optimism bias at work. Tali also talks about another experiment that they ran, this time with newlywed couples. Now, if you didn't know, in the Western world, 40% of people who get married end up in separation or divorce. And these newlywed couples were asked to predict what the probability was of their relationship ending in separation or divorce. Does anyone want to make a guess at what the average prediction was for these newlywed couples? No? Fair enough. It was 0. Literally every single couple said, no, this is not going to happen to us. We're not going to get divorced. It's just not going to happen. And it's not just marriage and weddings or intelligence, but we tend to underestimate the likelihood that we'll suffer from serious disease. We tend to underestimate the probability that we'll be in a car accident, and we tend to overestimate our career success chances. It's the most obvious example of the planning fallacy, and it's also the most pervasive because it occurs through every facet of a project, from your initial estimation of the entire project all the way down to those individual task estimates that you provide. If you've ever found yourself saying, it'll be better this time, that's optimism bias. Now, Kahneman suggests that eliminating optimism bias can be done by thinking through in advance all of the ways in which a project can fail, and then planning for them. Because if we're aware of potential issues, then we're much more likely to take action to prevent them from happening. And then if they do happen, well, we're already organized with a plan of what to do. At Atlassian, we've got a play for this. Of course we have. It's called the premortem. Jenny loves the premortem. She's a big fan. Uses it on a lot of her projects and has found it very effective in trying to handle optimism bias in those initial project estimates. I want to run through quickly what we do in a premortem so that hopefully you can use that in your projects to try and address optimism bias. But the first thing to realize with a premortem is that you need a diverse group of people. If you're going to run a premortem, you don't want to be just using your development team or your design team or your project management team. You want as broad a group of people as possible. Because if you've got that diverse group of people, then you're going to have a lot of diverse opinions. And that's going to mean that you're going to pick up on more of the risks and more of the opportunities that are going to come in your project. Once you've got your group of people together, you've got to set the scene. You need to make sure that everybody is singing off the same hymn book. You need to make sure that the scope, goals, and what you're trying to achieve is clearly communicated so that everybody knows where you're supposed to be working and where you're supposed to be thinking. Once you've done that, separate into two groups. The first group, we're going to call them the glass half empty group, are going to take the position of a project that has failed. It's been an unmitigating disaster. And they're going to talk about all of the things that caused that project to fail. Every single one of them. The other group, we'll call them the glass half full group, they're going to be looking at a project that was a resounding success. What are all the opportunities that they picked up on that allowed them to be as successful as they were? And you want to talk about this for a while. You want to let your imaginations run wild, at least within reason. Once you've got a huge list of opportunities and risks, you want to come back together and you want to spend a significant amount of time debating and discussing all of those ideas. You really want to nut out which are the core risks and which are the best opportunities. Once you've spent time discussing and understanding those risks and opportunities, the next thing is to vote on them. And the reason for that is that you're going to have a large list and you're probably not going to have enough time to go through every single one. So you're going to need to pick the top 3, the top 5, the top 10. For each of those items, you're going to need to plan. You're going to want to figure out what your mitigation strategy is for that potential risk or that potential opportunity. What are you going to do should the early warning signs of that problem arise? Once you have a plan for each of those top voted items, ensure that each one has an owner. And that person's responsibility is just to keep an eye out, to try and find out and discover when those things start to happening so that you can react early and keep your project on track. Once you've done all of that, the last thing to do is to share, and to share broadly. Allow other people to see what you've discovered and to provide feedback. It comes back to that idea of diversity and being able to find as many different reasons for a project succeeding or failing as you can. Now, there is another type of optimism bias, but it's more deliberate, and it's something called strategic misrepresentation. Strategic misrepresentation is the planned distortion or misstatement of fact in response to incentives in the budget process. But you could also think of it as being incentives for your own personal gain. It's effectively lying. And this is particularly endemic in the construction industry where you have multiple companies bidding for tenders on individual projects. And it's no stretch of the imagination to realize that the company who promises that they can achieve the most at the lowest cost will often give the work. Not only that, but there are often very few penalties for not delivering to budget or to time. It's kind of hard to find specific examples of strategic misrepresentation because people don't tend to like to admit that they're lying about things. But there are a number of examples of its symptoms. Projects that have delivered over budget with few of the attended benefits. There's the Eurofighter. Overran by 75% and failed to deliver on a number of its key benefits. It's the Millennium Dome. Love the Millennium Dome. Overran by 79% and was a year late, given that it was for the year 2000, and failed to deliver on a number of its promised revenue targets. And then there's the Scottish Parliament. Overran initial cost estimates by a factor of 10 and was delayed by 3 years. But the story that I like the most is the story of a young planner in the United States who explained that they needed a county supervisor had asked her to estimate the patronage on a possible extension to a light rail line that took passengers to a downtown Amtrak station. The planner diligently did their job and carefully estimated that the route would carry between 2,000 and 3,000 passengers per day. The supervisor then turned around and directed her to redo the calculations in order to show that the route would carry 12 to 15,000 riders per day. And he did that because he thought that that was the number necessary to justify a federal grant for system construction. Strategic misrepresentation also happens at a smaller scale inside of software because we all want to impress. And therefore, if we're asked whether we can complete a particular project in a particular time frame, then even though we might think that the time frame is maybe a little tight, we're going to tend to say, yeah, all right, because we want to impress. And we want that to come back in our annual reviews, and we want to get promoted, and we want to be rich. Now, there are a couple of things that we can do to start dealing with strategic misrepresentation. There's one at the project level, and there's one that we can do at the individual contributor level. At the project level, we can look at something called reference class forecasting. This tries to address strategic misrepresentation by comparing estimates for a particular project against similar projects that have happened in the past. And because it uses data from outside of our own project, reference class forecasting helps us to take more of an outside view on our planned actions. It comes in 3 steps. The first, and arguably the hardest, is to find projects that are similar to the one that we're about to deliver. And in software, it can be particularly challenging because we tend to think that the project that we're delivering is unique in some fashion. It either has a unique team, it has a unique feature set, it uses a unique set of technologies, and therefore there is nothing similar to the project that we're going to be delivering. But what I would challenge is to say that there are projects that will be similar in some regard, and it's important to find those and to use those and to build as big a group of those as possible when you're starting your reference class forecasting, because it's going to help you. It's going to help to ensure that when you're analyzing your data, that you're getting as good results as you possibly can. Once you've got your group of projects, the next thing to do is to define a probability distribution. And you need to do that for your selected reference class. And a reference class could be time, it could be budget, it could be scope, it could be any one of a number of things. Your probability distribution is going to look a bit like a bell curve. You're going to have projects that are really up here, and you're going to have projects that are really down here, and then you're going to have a group of projects that are going to be somewhere in the middle. Once you've got that distribution, you want to take the project that you've got and that you've estimated and compare it against the reference. If your estimates are in that middle ground, then you're probably in a good place. But if they're way down here, or if they're way up here, then you kind of want to understand what's going on and what's causing your project and your estimates to be so far adrift from what the normal seems to be. Is there something about the project that means it's going to be delivered significantly faster? Is there something about the project that means the budget is going to be significantly more? If you can understand those things, then you're going to be better placed to understand whether those initial project estimates are realistic, or whether you need to look deeper into whether there's something that you've missed that means that they need to be adjusted. So that's at the project level, but what about at the individual task level? For individual tasks, there's something called PERT estimation, program evaluation and review technique. I think one of the challenges that we have as individual contributors when we're estimated is that we provide a single number, whether that's a time or whether that's a story point estimate. It's a single identifiable value. And the problem with that is it can look very much like a target or a commitment to deliver. PERT estimation works around that by supplying 4 estimates instead of 1. You provide your optimistic estimate. This is your best case scenario. If everything goes smoothly, if all of the stars align, this is the best case scenario. When your boss comes and asks you if you can do this thing by the end of this week, the optimistic estimate is probably the one that they're looking for. At the other end of the scale, you've got the pessimistic estimate. And this is where everything goes horribly wrong and is 10 times harder than you ever expected. Somewhere in the middle, there's going to be a most likely estimate. And this is your best guess. And it is just that. It's a best guess given all the information that you have as to when you're going to complete the task at hand. And then there's the PERT estimate, which is a fourth calculated estimate. And the PERT estimate tends to be a slightly more pessimistic version of your most likely estimate. PERT estimation also provides a standard deviation, and this can be useful for figuring out how confident you are in your estimates. If you can imagine a PERT estimate with a very high pessimistic estimate and a very low optimistic estimate, that's going to generate a relatively high standard deviation. And what that means is that you're maybe not quite as sure about what's involved in the task at hand as you might think. If, on the other hand, you have an optimistic estimate and a pessimistic estimate that are very close together, well, that suggests that maybe you're more confident about the work at hand and you know what's going on. The last thing that I want to talk about is something called coordination neglect. Only focusing on the work that needs to be done and not the cost of integrating it. This is something that I'm particularly guilty of. I am never happier than when I'm spending hours looking at the backlog of work that we have, breaking up tasks into small chunks that can be delivered in parallel across my entire team, and then spending ages working with the team to generate realistic estimates so that I can produce a roadmap that I can show to my superiors as to when we're going to deliver the work. Unfortunately, what I usually completely fail to do is factor in all of the other things that need to happen to bring that work together and to deliver a completed feature to our customers. Capers-Jones, software engineering specialist, observed that project success is correlated with project size. Larger projects struggle more to deliver on time and to budget than smaller projects. And this is partly due to coordination neglect. The basic issue is that in software, larger projects require coordination among larger groups of people. And that requires more communication. As project size increases, the number of communication paths among different people also increases, but it's exponential. And this is known as the diseconomy of scale. Project size increases, so do the factors that lead to increased need for communication and integration, and as a result of that, a decrease in productivity. But there's another aspect of it as well. Omitted activities. This is a huge reason for coordination neglect and inaccurate estimation. One study found that developers, like me, tended to estimate pretty accurately the work that they've remembered to estimate, but that on average, they tended to overlook between 20 and 30% of the necessary tasks required in order to complete that task. Now, there are a couple of small things that we can do to try and address coordination neglect. One of them is better understanding how we as individuals use our time. And the other one is to be more proactive in looking at how our teams are performing and reacting when they start to go off track. And I want to start by talking about knowing your time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk all the way over here because I completely forgot one of the props that I needed for the talk. It's in my bag. Hi, how's it going? Sorry. Okay, thank you. All right. So one of the biggest changes that I've made over the last 12 months in terms of my own personal work is to start keeping a journal. This is my journal. My journal contains a page for every single day that I work. I track for every day what I plan to do from the moment that I wake up to the moment that I go to bed in 30-minute increments. Sounds terribly dull, but it's actually incredibly useful. Because what I also do when I get to work, when I start my day, is that I also track all of the things that I actually end up doing. So in my planned day, I'm going to get up, I'm going to have a shower, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to spend 2 hours working on some amazingly technical problem. I'm then going to spend an hour doing code reviews, I'm going to grab some lunch, I'm going to come back, I've got a planning meeting, and then I'm going to work on some personal growth stuff for my career. And then my actuals, I get up, I have a shower, I go to the work, I spend an hour browsing Reddit, I check my emails for 30 minutes, I do a bit of work, I go to lunch, I have some code reviews, and then the new intern wants some help figuring out some stuff, and then it's the end of the day and I didn't do anything that I intended. And that is really useful information. It confirms to me that I'm a terrible developer and that I've got problems with focus, but it actually teaches me some really useful things. For example, I know that I am way more productive in the mornings than I am in the afternoons. And that means I can adjust my day. I get up at 5, I work from 5 till 10, rather than getting into the office at 8 and working from 8 till 12. Because I know once the afternoon rolls around, that I'm going to be less productive. It also means that I can organize my day so that the things I need to focus on, like my development work, can happen in the mornings, and then I can do meetings, and I can do pairing in the afternoon, when I know that my willpower is at its lowest ebb. I also know that I consistently underestimate some specific areas of my work. Code reviews is a good one. I always underestimate how long it takes for my code to get from review into our code base. And I also know that I'm way more effective with certain types of technology. I love playing with HTML and CSS. I suck at Java. Knowing your time, understanding where all of those little minutes go, help you understand how long things really take, how long those individual tasks are going to take you in real time. And that can help you to be a lot more effective in the way that you estimate things. The other thing is to track and react. And this is probably something that you already know, and it's probably something that a lot of you already do, but I bring it up here because I know that it's something that I'm guilty of not doing. When we're running projects, especially when we're leading the development of projects, it can be very easy to overlook or even ignore when our projects start to come off track. Have you ever sat in a planning meeting and had a conversation that goes along the lines of, well, I know we didn't get everything done in this sprint, but we had that problem with CI that took us a couple of days, and that kind of put us off track a little bit, but we fixed that now, so we're back on track, and in the next sprint, we're probably going to pick it up, and it's all going to be about right. And then you get to the end of the next sprint, and the discussion goes, well, we had that bug that came in that we really needed to fix, so we had to down tools and do that, but we fixed that now, and yes, we were a little bit on track, but it's gone, and we're going to pick things up, and it's all going to be all right. And you do that across 3 or 4 sprints, and then it's 4 weeks before you have to release the product, and you suddenly realize, oh, we're not going to deliver. It's important that we analyze our data and realize when we need to be making change. There's something called the ostrich effect. Avoiding exposing yourself to information that may cause psychological discomfort. Have you ever found yourself not checking your bank balance at the end of the month? Yeah, I do that a lot. That's the ostrich effect. One of the problems that we had on a project that I delivered recently that we managed to solve by actually looking into data and making adjustments in our project plans was to do with estimation. What we found was that for the team, any task that was in a story point range of 1 to 3 was pretty accurately estimated. It was going to be delivered in 1 or 2 or 5 days. As soon as those estimates went beyond a 3 story point estimate, the delivery times were wildly different. It could be 2 days, and in some cases, it was up to 5 weeks for a single task. And those things all had similar or the same estimate. So we needed to make sure that we could react to that and we could adjust things such that we were able to get the project back on track. And the way that we did that was to break down our stories into smaller and smaller increments. So rather than capping out our story points at 8, we started capping them out at 3. And what that meant was that there was a lot more confidence in the estimates that we had and a better ability to plan and look forward to when the project was going to be delivered. The planning fallacy. It's a major cause of project misestimation, but by addressing optimism bias, strategic misrepresentation, and coordination neglect, we can start to improve upon and better manage our time. Would this have helped Atlassian in the construction of the Opera House? Well, we'd like to think so. Premortems may have picked up the challenges associated with those sales. Reference class forecasting could have highlighted the inherent optimism in that initial Opera House quote. Per estimation and standard deviations would have helped Peter Hall with his uncertainty of the work remaining after he picked up the project, and a better understanding of the time required to coordinate between the architecture team, the New South Wales government, and the various subcontractors would certainly have helped everyone understand the complexities inherent in a project of that size and magnitude. But honestly, we'll never know. What I do hope is that some or all of the ideas discussed here today will help you become better at estimation, or if not, will elicit discussions that will lead you to discoveries that will help you to estimate better in the future. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Steve. We have a few minutes for questions if anybody wants to ask Steve while he's up on stage. Points for sitting in front.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
How do you take out the meta effect of the optimism bias when you are doing the reference forecasting? Because I tried that with the team. Like, okay, guys, you are consistently overestimating.
Yep.
Let's see the things that you did prior and let's compare. Is this comparable? They always come back to me, no, this is different. It's a different snowflake, and it's completely a different thing. How do you make that?
I think it's a process problem. I don't think it's a technique problem. I think that there is a people and an understanding there. So it's like the story of Bob, okay? Bob never realizes that he's always 10 minutes late. He always thinks that he's going to be on time, and every problem that he suffers is a unique problem for that specific time. What I think is important to realize is that if something goes wrong in your project, it's not a one-off. Things are going to go wrong, and they will continue to go wrong, but they're just going to be different things every single time. If you can realize that and factor that into your estimation, if you can say, on average, when we deliver a project, 30% of the time is us spent dealing with things that we just didn't realize was going to happen, then maybe that will help bring those projects closer to being on track. But I think it's almost a learning and a realization thing than using a specific technique or tool. Is that helpful?
Thank you very much. I'm usually curious about the whole organizational perspective around it. It sounds you got things worked out within your team. How did you propagate those things within the whole company, and how does it work for the other teams?
So you've probably heard this a lot over the last couple of days, but Atlassian's a very open team. Every team can estimate and approach work in any way that they think is correct. There are a number of teams at Atlassian that don't do any estimation. They focus more on just getting things delivered when they think it's in a good enough quality to be delivered. And I actually think that's a really good way of approaching things. For us, we've struggled with hitting the right release date. We'd say we're going to target a particular release date, and then we missed it, and we miss it again. And it was really frustrating to both myself and Jenny that was happening. And I think what we started by looking at was, well, how can we make every sprint a green sprint? As quick question. How many of you here work in sprints, and how many of you here have more than 80% of your sprints completely green? Green sprint. So you complete all of the tasks in your sprint on sprint. So there's 1, 2, 3. It's really hard, right? I can count on the fingers of one hand how many green sprints I've had at Atlassian, and I've been there for quite a long time. So what we do is when we find something that works, when we find a process that works really well for us, we share that information, we communicate it, and we make other people aware. We don't try and enforce a particular way of doing things. We would rather people see things, try them, and then adopt them, rather than trying to push process onto people, if that makes any sense.
Other questions?
You mentioned there a formula which was the PERT, no? Have
Yes.
you tried to use that? I don't know if it's possible and it's useful to use between different peoples, like you have an optimistic person saying the optimistic one,
Yeah.
pessimistic person saying the pessimistic one, and then, because you mentioned it as an individual one, so.
Yeah.
I'm a person, I believe this, my optimistic way is 4 days, my pessimistic is 10 days, I think maybe 7 days, I apply the formula. But then you have it in different persons. You have
Yes.
the optimistic that always says, yeah, we can do it in 3 days. And the other says, yeah, we can do it in 10.
I'm not sure, honestly. What I would say is, as long as you are consistent in your optimism, then you hopefully will be able to adjust for that over time. You've got to, with PERT estimation, you're providing an optimistic estimate and a pessimistic estimate. If you find that you are coming in way more to the pessimistic every single time because you're kind of underestimating the amount of time that it takes, then you want to track and react. You want to look at that data, realize that you're skewed in one direction, and to try and adjust for that. Now, what I wouldn't recommend is padding out estimates just by 20% every single time. You really want to understand what's going on so that you can do the right thing. Premortems can help with that. Although the premortem tends to be on a project level basis, by getting into that ritual, by understanding and seeing the value of running premortems, it can help you to then apply that same or similar process into your individual PERT estimation. Another option is to pair, or to work with, when you're providing estimates for an individual task, rather than just doing it yourself, work with someone else. Find someone who's way more pessimistic with you, because in general, although we have our own optimism bias for ourselves, that doesn't extend to other people. We tend to be a lot less optimistic about everybody else.
All right, I think that's the last question we had time for, but we're going to switch things over so we can get started on the next session. But thank you so much, Steve. And if anybody wants to ask Steve some more questions, you can come up and chat with him after.
Yeah, I'm going to be on the Confluence booth with the Confluence people, so come up and chat. Love to talk to you.
Awesome, thank you.